long ago, and it happened far away. The moral of the story has been lost until today. Although we shouldn't let the past complicate the now, we wrap a stack of artifacts that help us show us how. Whatnot hopes and soggy dreams become who I am today. I'm feeling more alive in more important ways. Lost all ability to think for myself. I put it on the table, then you help yourself. Wow, wow. This place stinks of corruption. Shots fired confirm my assumption. Everyone is evil in their own special way. This advice I'm giving you today. I'm starting.
We good? Okay. First of all, guys, we really got to step it up because I hear that we are boring Yuli in this class. So we've got to make this class more interesting for Yuli. All right, if I say this to you, you hear me say this sentence, y'all go ahead and eat. I'm fixing to watch the Bears game. It's a fairly normal sentence. It doesn't look like you could get much information out of this sentence other than the information about what I'm about to do. And actually, if this sentence were analyzed by a specialist we call a linguist, what do we think a linguist studies?
Language.
Language. Were analyzed by a linguist, a language specialist, these simple two sentences are full of primary source evidence that takes us back years. So let's analyze the sentences. First of all, we look at the y'all and the fixin' to. Somebody who says y'all and fixin' to is using a specific dialect of English. Dialects are subdivisions of languages. Right? It's why somebody in the United States, let's get more specific, somebody in Texas versus somebody in New York versus somebody in Ireland versus somebody in Scotland, they're all speaking the same language and they can communicate with one another, but they're not speaking it the same way. And there will be noticeable differences and some confusion, some difficulty understanding. It's the same reason why somebody in Spain, somebody in Mexico, somebody in Puerto Rico, somebody in Venezuela, they can communicate with each other. They're all speaking the same language, but not identically. And there will be noticeable differences. Those subdivisions of languages are known as dialects. There are 6,500 living languages in the world, and then they're all divided up into smaller dialects. Y'all and fixin' to provides evidence that the person who used those terms has roots in the region of the United States. Ignore the word rebirth. This was the best picture of the Mid-South I could find, but I don't know what the rebirth is about. From a region known as America's Mid-South. Y'all and fixin' to are not common to people who are native to Ireland or Canada or Michigan. Y'all and fixin' to, y'all is a contraction. What does it mean? You all, right? Y'all and fixin' to, when somebody uses those terms, it's evidence that that person has roots in America's Mid-South. What about this? Y'all go ahead and eat, I'm fixing to watch the Bears game. And I'm not just talking about the content of the statement. Yes, the Bears, I'm talking about the NFL team, the Chicago Bears. But I'm not using the fact that they're the Chicago Bears as evidence for anything, because you could be a fan of a sports team without being from that region. Is anybody a big fan of a sports team that is not associated with their hometown? Well, that failed. But there are such people. So it's not the content that's going to tell you anything. In this case, it's the accent. And you've got to listen closely because my accent is not super thick. But when I pronounce this sentence, y'all go ahead and eat, I'm fixing to watch a Bears game, I pronounce the TH as a D. Not extremely, I don't have a very thick accent, but it's more of a D sound. I'm fixing to watch the Bears game. The S at the end of Bears is pronounced more like the S in sauce, the Bears, rather than the Z that standard English would have. The Bears is not how I say it. I say the Bears. If time remains at the end of class, I'll show you a more exaggerated example of what my accent is. Two statements then, or these two sentences then, contain primary source evidence about my own roots and ancestry. It tells you that the person who says this way, has roots both in the American Mid-South and in the Chicago area, because these are characteristic marks of a Chicago accent. And in fact, those things are both true. That's a tombstone of my great-great-great-grandfather, James E. Childers. You can find that at Mount Pleasant Cemetery in Ripley, Mississippi. The y'all and fixin' to that I use regularly, despite not having a Southern accent, come from having spent so much time growing up around my grandfather, who was born and raised in Mississippi. It was my grandfather from Mississippi who moved up to Illinois in the Chicago area, where my father and then I were both born. So buried in my language is primary source evidence. Yes, where I'm from, the Chicago, that's evidence of where I'm from. But this man who I never met, and I never met anybody who met him, he died, he lived from 1772 to 1854. This probably isn't very clear, but he lived from 1772 to 1854 in Ripley, Mississippi. His imprint is in every sentence I speak. Primary source evidence for him and his community and his life and his region, a linguist can find in every sentence that I speak. The discipline of historical linguistics analyzes the languages that are spoke today for evidence just like this, to recreate otherwise lost information about the past. If I were to point at the map and say, what can we know about people who lived here 5,000 years ago? There's not a map on, so it doesn't matter where I point. Almost anywhere I point 5,000 years ago would not be a literate culture. There were very few literate cultures 5,000 years ago. So go back, think about whatever your own background and ancestry is. Because there were so few literate cultures 5,000 years ago, almost all of our ancestors 5,000 years ago would be from a country that only possessed orature, not literature. Most of the languages spoken that long ago are long gone. Languages die out. Of the 6,500 some odd languages that exist today, 43% are endangered. And linguists predict that anywhere between 50 and 90% of Earth's languages will be dead by 2150. Why? Why do you think languages die? Jesse, you're welcome to participate, but I'm going to get Jesse too.
Because people stop speaking them.
Okay, well, yes, because people stop speaking, and that's right. What makes people stop speaking languages? Sineethia.
They might not be spread around or passed, from mouth to mouth, generation to generation. They might just die out.
Any thoughts on how that happens?
The language evolves.
Languages evolve. Okay, then we're going to talk specifically about that for most of today's class. Other than evolution?
Maybe bigger languages like English start dominating, so not enough people speak the native language for it to be sustainable.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look at American languages. Languages native to the Americas. There are hundreds of them. English, Spanish, and French have been taking chainsaws to the American languages for 500 years. And every generation for 500 years, the number of people who speak American languages decreases and decreases and decreases. Because Spanish, English, and French, all European implant languages, replace them. So, that's today. 5,000 years ago, your ancestors who were almost certainly illiterate, almost certainly speaking dead languages, how would you ever know what the dead, extinct language of a non-literate people was like? Because you can't go back and check the documents. Why not?
They probably don't exist.
They certainly is illiterate people. Illiterate people don't produce documents. Historical linguistics is a discipline that can analyze language as it's spoken today and find primary source evidence of what the ancestor languages of today's languages were. And understanding a people's language is key to understanding that people. Miss Sineethia,
Does that have to do
you want a selfie while you're asking questions?
No, of course not. It doesn't look like you're bald-head. Anyways, would it be related in any way to etymology?
Yeah, so etymology is the origin of specific words. Like yesterday when I said, or the day before when I said, well, manuscript means written by hand because manum is the Latin for hand and script is to write. So that's etymology. Yeah.
But would linguists use etymology in their day-to-day basis? Okay.
Absolutely. So etymology is a tool used by the discipline of linguistics. Excellent insight. Take a look at these lines. Okay. Every line here says the same thing. Gracias a Dios es viernes. Any Italian speakers? Otherwise, I'm going to humiliate myself. I'm going to humiliate myself worse than I did with the Spanish.
I want you to box up so bad.
Gracias a Dios e venerdì. Dank al Dio estás pendredo. Portuguese speakers, help me. Do I have Portuguese speakers? Come on, y'all just pretending not to speak Portuguese. I really don't know what this is.
You just pronounce it as an S. Gracias a Dios.
Adeus e sexta-feira.
Mister, pronounce it as an S.
Sexta-feira.
Mister.
Yes.
Pronounce the thing as an S. Gracias a Dios es sexta-feira.
Well, you should have told me that.
Up.
Well, you did. Romanian. Mulțumesc lui Dumnezeu ca e binary. Vietnamese. Kamanchua Amnai Latu South. Swahili. Stop me if you speak these languages and bail me out, please. Asante Mungu ni Ijumwa.
So I speak English.
Okay, go for it.
Thank God it's Friday.
Okay, so they all say the same thing in these different languages. Do you notice anything about the languages in white print? You can't see them? Go up and look if you want.
I can see him.
Oh. Oh. Notice how the languages in white print, certainly not identical,
But they have stuff in
but
common.
they're similar. Gracias, grazie, grass, okay? For thank, Dios, Dio, Dio, Deus. It's harder to tell with Romanian, so maybe you could intuit that Romanian is a little further removed, but still related to the others. Dumnezeu. Clearly, Portuguese went its own way with Friday, so it's just saying sixth day instead of using a variation of Viernes Binary. Stop laughing at my Spanish right now.
Sorry, it's funny. The earnest.
I'm going to be laughing at your ancient Greek here in a couple weeks.
Hey, whoa.
Well, as you notice that the Vietnamese, the Swahili, and the English don't have nearly as many similarities. The reason for that is, and many of us probably know this, the languages in white print are related. they have a common ancestor. The yellow, the blue, the green are not related, or far, 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 far more distantly related. And so the more closely languages are related, the more similar they are. It doesn't mean that because two languages are closely related that people can freely communicate back and forth. If you speak Spanish and you're teleported to Brazil, it's not easy. It's not smooth sailing communicating. But I imagine as far as communicating, you would rather be teleported to Brazil than to Vietnam. You would have an easier time communicating in Brazil, at least with the basics, than you would in Vietnam. Because Spanish and Portuguese are related tongues. Spanish and Vietnamese are not. So here's the relationship between these. We call these Romance languages. Romance, not because they're lovey-dovey, hugging and kissing. Romance, because their roots are in Latin, which was the language of who?
Latina?
Monica, you say it? Alexia? Rome, yes. Yes. So
Mr.
all, yes, and
Was it called Latinia or Latino, like the place?
Latium.
Latino.
Latium, the region of Italy.
Latium, yeah, there you
Yes. So all of these languages descend from Latin. So what happens is people are all speaking this language, and then in different places, the language mutates. The language evolves to the point where eventually you've got two different languages. And the mutation, the evolution continues and continues and continues until eventually people who were once all speaking the same language, just different dialects of the same language, can no longer freely communicate with one another. And when we can no longer freely communicate, that's when we say we are no longer speaking the same language. That's the point at which we say a new language has emerged. So a simplified version of this would be to say that Spanish started as Latin with a Spanish accent. French started as Latin with they wouldn't have used the word French, they would have used the word Gallic accent. But the accents, the dialects, they continue to mutate, and when left to their own, historically, will eventually form new languages. The same would happen today, but is probably slowed down. Jade, I'm just going to grab your phone for a second. Probably slowed down because of these. Because of our access to international communication like that. Our access to international communication probably slows down the mutation. Because now we hear what other speakers of our language across the world sound like, and we communicate with other speakers of our language across the world, so we'll continue to speak in a way that I can still be understood even if you're in Ireland. I can still be understood even if you're in Scotland, even if you're in Texas, even if you're in Wales. Spanish speakers will speak in a way, because of the internet, that you can be understood, whether you're in Puerto Rico or Venezuela or Nicaragua or Mexico or Spain. But before this international communication, you would have been more isolated. So what eventually would have happened is that English as it's spoken in Texas would eventually become the Texan language. And English as it's spoken in Chicago would eventually become a Chicagoan language. And Spanish as it's spoken in Venezuela would eventually have become the Venezuelan language or the Puerto Rican language. Rapid international communication slows down that process a little bit. Here's a quick view of how language mutation works. So, I'm going to watch the Bears game. That would be the most straightforward, common English way to say what I said at the beginning class. Okay? I'm going to watch the Bears game. In the American Mid-South, going mutates into fixing to. Why would it mutate into fixing to? In this case, fixing to is more clear. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm using a metaphor. It's almost a poetic way of speaking, because I'm not actually going anywhere. I'm treating my plan, my intention, as if it's a journey, as if it's a voyage. To fix something, I'm going to fix dinner. Means to make or prepare. So fixing to is actually more precise. So when this mutation happens in Mississippi, Tennessee, it's replacing a more poetic way of speaking with a more literal way of speaking. And then the next mutation is pretty natural. We drop the G. In English, we do this all the time. Fixing to becomes fixing to. Why? Because it's easier to say. So much of language mutation happens just because it's easier to say. And for most of history, if this happened, it would, our ideas of proper grammar, that there are rules and like somebody's in charge, I'll get you in a second, is new and it's artificial. Normally this would just mean that this is what the word is now, that the word has changed. Again, international communication has slowed down that process, and academia has slowed down that process. Eden. Did I? Where? Oh, okay, that's, okay, Eden points out there's two twos there, that's a mistake. Okay. But the evolution's not done. Okay. It's not like fixing to is the ideal way of expressing this, that it cannot morph, it cannot evolve any further. What's the next level of evolution in this phrase? Jesse? And the phrase fixing to. What do you think the next level of evolution in that phrase is? You're close. Where you got it? Fin. Now, this will sound artificial coming from me, but the phrase, I'm finna watch a Bears game, is simply the natural evolution of language. And here is its ancestry. From going to, change to fixing to, change to be more literal, to fixing to finna. And here is the history of the phrase, okay? So finna originated in the early 1900s in, it says the African-American language. It's really African-American dialect of English. The contraction finna was taken from the pronunciation of the words fixing to. It's a natural evolution of language. And when that process is left to play out naturally, it inevitably leads to the end of one language and the birth of a new language. Yes, Miss Sineethia.
I'm sorry, but could it get any simpler than finna?
Yes.
I'm sure it could. I don't know. Because fin is not in my vocabulary, so I'm not contributing to the further evolution. I'm like stuck at the fixing to.
Can it become an acronym though?
Yes,
You
Eden.
could just say IMA, like, and just drop
It's
it.
the same process.
Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah, okay, yeah. So what IMA does is IMA skips the fixing to level, and IMA goes from I'm going to I'm gonna to IMA.
Well, it's even simpler, John.
Yeah. It's the same process with, because fixing to is specifically Mid-South U.S. All right? So not everybody who says I'm going to has gone through that stage of evolution to I'm fixing to. Right? Alternate forms of language evolution go straight from I'm going to I'm gonna. There is a Mid-South variation of that that's something like I'm gwine, which also sounds artificial coming from me because that's old, deep Mid-South, not, grandson of an old, deep Mid-South person, but old, deep Mid-South. I'm gwine.
Washed up
But that
little
evolution is really going to, gonna, I'm a. Yes, absolutely. We can see this evolution play out in real time. Evolution is fast. So, this is a post of mine from Facebook a couple years ago, 1 year ago, a little more than a year ago.
Oh my god.
So I posted a video on Edmodo. because it was during remote learning, we're all communicating with each other by video, and the video was really long. And so Catherine Lopez comments, say less, on my video. And I interpret it to be that she's criticizing how long the video is, that she literally wanted me to say less. And Mr. Rajo, who is less of an old man than I am, had to clarify for me that say less actually means I got you, because I'd asked for help with something. So language evolves so quickly that people who share the earth at the same time, if I live a normal human lifespan, even though we're different generations, we'll have like 45 years of overlap where we're on the earth at the same time. 26 of those years are in the past, by the way, but we'll have like 45 years of overlap where we're on the earth for the same time. And yet, the evolution of language passed me by. There's a list of things that I would sound ridiculous saying.
Say it.
Will you say them, please?
It would be very cringe for me to say any of these.
Oh my gosh.
Goodbye.
Please, mister.
Did you keep pronouncing buzzing as bustin' one time?
Olivia. Olivia's fixing to go to the bathroom.
Mister, didn't you say bustin' one time?
Yeah.
Say it, bustin'. Say it, please.
Think of the views, Mr. Childers. Think of the views.
Sir,
Before, listen now,
Make a sentence with every.
make a sentence with every word on there.
Mister, come on, it's gonna be worth it.
I listened by listen. I learned by listening. So I just
I get the impression that if I tried to use these in a sentence, it would be physically painful for Kate. That's the look on her face, and I can only see this look in her face.
maybe just read them.
Mister,
you want it?
do it, Mister. Mister, do it. Do it, Mister. Mister, do it because your liberal arts degree isn't gonna pay for any of this. Come on, do it.
Let's take a vote.
Come on. Do it, Mister. You gotta pay wages somehow.
Guys, throw dollar bills at him. Do it.
Bruh. No cap, these basic ass students want me to use all these cringe words, and I can't vibe to that. Because I'm not fussing. And I never did know what the hell yeet meant. I don't want to go to jail, so we won't do bay. And am I done? Bet.
You forgot bro. Didn't you guys say bro? You didn't say no cap or bro.
I did, bro. I started with bra.
You started with bet.
Okay, good. Okay.
You didn't say no cap.
He did say no cap.
You didn't say no cap.
He did
I
say
did. I
it.
started
did.
with
Say it
bra.
then.
No cap, these basic students want me to blah, 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 blah.
We missed
Mister, you finally put your liberal arts degree to use. I'm so proud of you.
He didn't say bustin'.
What's that?
He said busted.
Thank you, thank you.
We need
So,
the teacher.
yes, Omar. My brother? Different brother. Yeah, I'm the oldest.
You will never catch me calling my brother
Yeah, so it's me and Joe and Sean grew up together, then we got like half. Oh, yes. Please. If, for most of history, when this happens, eventually what would happen is that a new language would evolve. Now, it's international communication and online communication that slows this process down. It spreads the new words quickly, but it also kills off the new words. Many of these will not survive. Some may, and there's no way for me to predict which will, but my guess is that in 10 years, nobody will be using the word yeet. Or bussin'. Maybe they will.
Little kids do.
but many of them will die out. When they don't, they lead to the evolution of a new language. So how do we end up with all these different languages, born from the common parent of Latin? Through this process and through the going to, fixing to, finna process. So it's the introduction of new slang terms and the simplification of pronunciation. Simplification of pronunciation, despite what your grammar teachers may tell you, is not corruption of language. It's just human efficiency. There is no correct or incorrect way to use language. Language is a human tool. All language is subjective. There are ways to use language that are more helpful or less helpful in particular situations. I wouldn't suggest using any of these on a college application or in a PhD thesis, but not because they're wrong or inappropriate or improper grammar, because there is no such thing. You would only avoid them because they're not helpful in the particular situation. The choice that we make of what language to use when we possess multiple languages, multiple dialects, or multiple versions of the same dialect, this would just be a variation within a dialect. The choices we make of which versions to use in certain situations is known as code switching. We speak differently. Do you speak the same way around your grandmother that you speak with your friends in school when the teacher's not listening?
Yeah, I speak a different language.
What's that?
I speak a different language.
Omar speaks an entirely different language, and most of us, even if we don't, and many of us probably also speak an entirely different language with our grandparents, but even if we share the same language, we probably use it somewhat differently or very differently, right? There were things I would say to my high school buddies that I would never have said to my grandma.
Like what?
Oh, well, that's the next slide. Not the next slide. That'll be next week problem. All right. So, there are 147 language families that linguists have recreated by analyzing the languages that are spoken. So languages that are related to each other, that share a common ancestor, are part of the same language family, which tells you, even if the speakers are spread out very far, that they have common ancestry or at least common cultural roots in a single place sometime in the distant past. This graph, these are kind of hard to see, I imagine, from across the room. This graph looks at the largest families based on the number of languages included in the family. So the white or gray here is other. So 263,631 other. But here we have in the blue, Trans-New Guinea. The Trans-New Guinea language family. All of the languages spoken in a tiny place, but a place, remember yesterday, we talked about New Guinea briefly, that's super isolated for tens of thousands of years. 477 languages in that family. Indo-European, spoiler alert, that's our language family, 445 spoken languages. Niger-Congo, 1,535 spoken languages. If we look by the number of speakers, we'll see that our language family, the family that English belongs to, Indo-European, has by far the most number of speakers. 3.29 billion people speak an Indo-European language. Let's see, the green is Sino-Tibetan. Sino is the adjective form of China. So the Sino-Tibetan language family has 1.4 billion speakers. Let's look at one of these families more closely. So here's the Niger-Congo language family. In tiny print, are the names of all these related languages that are part of the Niger-Congo family. And this, what you're looking at is Africa. So you see through a large swath of Africa, like the languages spoken are related, are part of the same family. And there's a note on the map that says that less than 20% of the Niger-Congo languages are actually shown on the map. Does it make sense why people in this region would speak languages that are related to each other?
Yes,
Yes, why?
because they're geographically close, so, you know.
They're geographically close to each other. So the spread and diversification of this language family is easy to picture. Okay? It's just simply people moving and spreading out, and it's fairly uniform across the region. Here's a look at the Indo-European language family. And the first thing that might jump out at you is Indo-European. Wait a minute. India and Europe are not close, and they're very different. Why would India and Europe share a language family? The fact is, analysis of the spoken languages of people in as diverse places as India, Iran, Germany, England, show that the languages have common roots, that they go back to a Central Asian population about 7,000 years ago. And that a single Central Asian population that we call the Proto-Indo-Europeans, we don't know what they call themselves. So we call them, proto means first, all right? So our name for this ancestral population is just the first Indo-Europeans. We take them back to Central Asia about 7,000 years ago, and from there they spread out in different directions. So that, let's see, here we are, here's English. What happens is some speakers of Proto-Indo-European, their language evolves into what's called Germanic, which then continues to change and evolve through the same process as going to Fix and to Finna, into the North Germanic language, the West Germanic language, East Germanic, West Germanic morphs into Old English and Old Frisian and Old Dutch, and they continue to morph, continue to evolve. Far, far, far away, some Indo-European speakers go elsewhere, and when their language evolves, it evolves into something called Indo-Iranian. And then we follow those mutations. Some of them become Indic, some of them become Sanskrit, and some of that becomes the living languages of India today. Sanskrit is the classical language of India. Ancient Indian religious texts are written in Sanskrit. It looks and sounds nothing like English, and yet it is related to English through the common ancestor, Proto-Indo-European. So, dwa, or dwo is the reconstructed Proto-Indo-European word for two, the number two. And this chart shows its evolution in different directions. Where are we? Okay, so for our Romance speakers, dwo becomes duo as it evolves into Latin. Duo becomes dos, or due, or do, or dwa, maybe? That sounds more French, but that's not it. Well, I don't know how Portuguese is pronounced. Whereas dwo becomes twi. You heard someone say dwo and you heard someone say twi, you wouldn't immediately know that they're saying the same thing. But linguists have found very regular patterns in the way our language evolves, so that both of these are equally possible evolutions of dwo, and they just happened in different ways in different places. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about historical linguistics on Monday. Tomorrow I am not going to be here. There'll be a substitute teacher. You'll have the full period to work on getting your Cambridge project choice ready. You know, do some simple research, do some Google searches and things. Get that ready to turn in by Monday. If you want to turn it in on paper tomorrow, these manila folders, just find the one with your period number on it and put it in there. Next week, we'll finish up historical linguistics on Monday. We'll have a special symposium, a little activity called History as Mystery, which right now your power school might say is something that's due tomorrow. There's nothing due tomorrow. It's just I had originally planned to do it tomorrow, and I'm not going to be able to. So by next week, we will both be in ancient Greece and ready to start our Cambridge projects. Don't forget the reading assignment. You can also use the class time tomorrow to work on the reading assignment and the reading questions. You can find all this in Schoology in the quarter 1 assignments folder. Thank you to our videographer, Miss Sineethia. Do a little selfie and show them who they're working with. All right. Thank you.
What's that video of the bears and that guy?
Oh yeah, for just a quick minute. Yeah. So this is. Okay, welcome everybody. The first thing I want to do is just walk you through my Schoology page and how we use Schoology in this class. This is the one I'm filming, so I'm a little more limited in my movement than normal. All right, so when you go to school, first of all, this is nobody's first year here, so you all used Schoology last year, is that right? Okay. Well, when you go on Schoology, you probably arrive, and your layout's going to be different if you're using a phone, but all the same stuff will be there. So you probably arrive somewhere like this, where you get all the updates from all your teachers and the school and anyone you're subscribed to all at once. And that's fine. That's a good place. What I want to encourage you to do for my class, though, is don't just rely on this Schoology newsfeed. Because what happens is I share something, and then Mr. Winter shares 14 things, and my something that you need to see has been pushed so far down the list. Everything okay? Push. Oh, okay. I hallucinate knocks on the doors myself sometimes. So what I want to encourage you to do is actually go to my page each day before class. Okay, so go to your courses. Here we are, ACE Classical Studies. You'll land on my updates page. What you want to look for each day is a post that looks like this. This is our main daily post. What will your clue be that what you're looking at is the main daily post? Yes, the all caps bold print statement. This is the main daily post. So my main daily post on Schoology each day will tell you what we're going to be doing in class this day, talk to you about any assignments that are open and any other information you need to know. There's a lot in today's, which is why I opened with this. Don't freak out over how much stuff is in this post. Notice that these things are spread out through the end of the month. All right, so that'll be up there every day. And pretty soon, once we have a few assignments in circulation, I'll give you an update every day, a guide that tells you, if you took my class last year, I did that last year too. So a guide that tells you what assignments are due, when they are due, or when they were due, if they're late, how many points they're worth, if they've lost any points, where to find them. Every day that'll be in front of you. Doesn't make sense to make that guide yet because we haven't done anything yet. But once we start doing stuff, that will be there for you. If you've missed class at all last week, you can scroll down on the updates page back to my post from this weekend, where there are the videos from the first and second class. If you missed either of those, you really should, you really do want to watch the videos, because you don't want to be lost on where we are and what we're doing, especially when it comes to the Cambridge projects. So this one here, Cambridge Projects and Exam, that's where I went over your options and what you need to do and how you get your college credit and what the test is like and all that stuff. So be sure to go on Schoology and watch those videos if you missed class or if you need to review. It is similar to dual enrollment in that it offers you college credit, but it's a Cambridge just thinks its own way. So, yeah. What we're looking at now is the materials page in my Schoology. You'll see there's a number of folders there. This top folder, Cambridge Projects, it's still a work in progress, but by next week when we actually start working on the Cambridge Projects, this is going to be your go-to source for the materials that you need, the resources you need to prepare for your Cambridge exam. When you go in there, you'll see it's divided up into Greece and Rome. And then let's go inside Greece. Well, there's an Alexander folder that's going to be, again, this isn't complete yet because we're not starting until next week, but in here will be the sources for the Alexander project. In here will be sources for the vase painting project. And in the third folder that doesn't exist yet will be sources for the Aristophanes project. And we'll have the same thing with Rome. Okay. So you will eventually spend a good bit of time in this folder. Sorry, everything's taking an eternity to load. The Homer and Virgil folder, once we, in a few weeks, we'll start covering the Iliad and the Odyssey. Here's where you will find electronic copies of those works. So you've got the Iliad in both English and Spanish, the Odyssey in both English and Spanish. Later on, after Christmas, the Aeneid in both English and Spanish. These Spanish translations, by the way, are real translations made by human beings. I didn't just take the Iliad and run it through Google Translate. So they are good and readable as best I can tell. The folder you'll get most familiar with, I think, is the Q1 folder. Eventually, there'll be 4 of these. Yadi, what do you suspect the next 3 might be titled?
Maybe 2, 3, or 4.
That I was going to call them something else, but that's a good idea. I think I'll change to Yadi's way. In here you'll find Q1. This folder assignments. That's where all the assignments will be. For my class, we're all here in person anyway, so when you turn in an assignment, you can do it on paper and turn it into me. That's fine. Some people prefer to type and would rather submit it electronically. Then you can go on Schoology and submit it that way. But instructions for assignments will be in this folder. Your ability to submit the assignments online will be in this folder. Let's see what's in there now. All right, so the first assignment that's open is the Cambridge Project choice. Remember, you've got all week. You've been asked, what have you been asked to do? Let's take a look at it. You've been asked to do what I'm calling simple research on your 6 project options. Simple research means looking them up online, Google, Wikipedia, YouTube. Just get a feel for what all 6 of these things are. And then tell me which 2 you pick and why. So if you want to do that on paper, that's great. If you want to do it electronically, you can use the link right here on Schoology to submit the assignment here. Also attached to the assignment on Schoology is a more detailed explanation of each of your options. So let's see what that looks like. Looks like a whole lot of waiting. Who would want some? Hang on, no idea why that's looking like that. I want this to go away. I'm old, forgive me, well, I can't see it. So, for example, you're doing the Alexander the Great project. I told you, you'll be provided with exactly what it is you need to learn about Alexander. Well, here is everything you need to learn about Alexander for your exam. So it tells you, you want to know about his family, childhood, and upbringing, purpose of Alexander's campaign and travels, reality of his military achievements. And you go through this and see. Now, it's a lot. It's a lot. But don't let that frighten you. Remember, you have 15 months to learn this material. It's a lot, but your test is not tomorrow. It's 15 months from now. One thing to keep in mind so you don't have a heart attack. When it tells you what sources, your primary sources you'll be reading, these are the things I'm going to provide you in those folders, though I suggest you buy your own copies. Sometimes it'll say something like this, and you want to read Arian, that's the author. The book is The Campaigns of Alexander, books 2, 3, and 7. And then Plutarch's Life of Alexander, you say, well, holy crap, is that 4 books? Not really, not really. So don't have a heart attack here. Books in this context, what they're calling books is much closer to what we would call chapters. So Plutarch's Life of Alexander is about 90 pages, and then you need to become familiar with 3 chapters. When it says books 2, 3, and 7, it's really 3 chapters from the book, The Campaigns of Alexander. That's a lot more manageable. So now you're looking at like reading 200 pages in 15 months, not 4 books. I think we can do that. I think we can all do that. And you're not being thrown out in the ocean alone on this either. I encourage collaboration. So once we start working next week on the projects, you and other people who are doing the same research can pull your resource, pull your ideas, work together to prepare. And of course, I'm right along here with you. So that's Schoology. That's how I use Schoology. I want to show you one more thing, though. Corner 1. Oh, because I haven't. Yeah. So the assigned readings folder. When there are assigned readings, that's where you'll find them. There's one that I was going to give you last week. It was going to be a suggested, not required, but then Schoology wasn't working. So that's this number 1. If you wanted to read that, I certainly welcome you to do that. The first mandatory one is upcoming, and that's already posted there. And there will be an assignment, some reading questions that go with that reading. How can you tell, Alondra, can you see any clues in there or how one might tell whether a reading is suggested or mandatory? Any clues you can see in there?
Well, maybe by chance, perhaps, if it says suggested, it might be suggested.
Ah, that's it. And I'm even going to make it more clear from now on. So the next time there's a mandatory assignment, reading assignment, I'll actually put the deadline in the file name. So I don't know what it'll be, but let's say number 5 pops up and it's mandatory, then it will be 5 Diary of Isabella Fabrizio, read by September 6th, or whatever the item is. Let me go back to assignments one more thing. I do want to let you know, I'm not trying to pile a bunch of stuff on you all at first. Notice that this stuff is all spaced out pretty well. I just want you to be aware of everything. So if you wanted to get an early jump on things. But this assignment number 3 here, it's not due till August 30th. But what that assignment is you read that document. So it says read the document, Cycladic, Minoan, Mycenaean. That document is in 3 sections. So I asked you to read the first 2 sections by August 24th and the 3rd section by August 27th. And then there are 18 questions to answer about the reading. And then you would turn that in on paper or by Schoology by August 30th. So that's 2 weeks away. Okay, let's just do a little reading and answer the questions, and you got 2 weeks on it. But just want you to be aware that that is there. Okay. Any questions about Schoology, about the assignments, especially the Cambridge Project Choice assignment, which is the most upcoming one, due a week from today? Everybody good? Okay. What I want to do with you for the rest of today is just, this won't be a very difficult class today. I want to do sort of a simple review of concepts that you've been working with for years now, and that's the concepts of primary and secondary sources. I think it doesn't hurt to have these things fresh in our mind, especially given the type of work that we're going to be doing. in this class, so let's just make sure we're all on the same page if we've gotten rusty, and because we're going to spend the rest of the year juggling primary sources. So let's remind ourselves what they are. Who wants to do that? Who wants to remind us what a primary and secondary source are? Come on. You know, you're talking to Mike when I'm taping. Caleb, enlighten me.
I'm sure that our first, what is it called? Sorry, a primary source is like first-hand information, you know, they're coming either directly from the person or I suppose like a biography, and then a secondary source would be like a book about it, or written by someone
by somebody that
studies
it, but wasn't
there.
Yes, that's it. It all comes down. Yeah, go for it. The difference between the two all comes down to primary sources being first-hand accounts, someone who was there, who witnessed it, or accounts that go back to the time of the event that you're exploring. Secondary sources are outsider perspectives. We use them both. But primary source is material written, produced, or created during the time period that you're exploring. They let you get as close as possible to the event. Okay? There's a limit. There's a limit to how much I can understand about something I haven't experienced myself. I will never have a true, a full, a thorough understanding of what it's like to have been enslaved, of what it's like to have lived through the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. All right. But I can move toward understanding those experiences which I never had when I could hear the voices of those who did have the experience. If I haven't experienced it and neither has my source, then we get further and further and further removed, which means our understanding decreases and decreases and decreases. It's not to say secondary sources are bad. They're necessary, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. But primary sources are what get you right back to the moment, the first-hand account. Okay, so some examples. Memoirs, autobiographies. Natalie, what's an autobiography?
I know what it is.
Okay, someone want to help Natalie out. Autobiography, Madison, remember?
It's when like someone writes a biography about themselves.
About themselves, yeah. Auto means self in this context. So my autobiography, if I write The Triumph of Jeff Childers, that's an autobiography. If I write The Triumph of Yadiel Ramirez, it's not an autobiography. An autobiography is a book you write about yourself. Diaries, journals, speeches, interviews, letters, memos, manuscripts. We know what a manuscript is? What it literally means? It means something written by hand is a manuscript. Manum is the Latin for hand, which is held pretty closely by the Spanish. So it's script written with your mano or your manum or your hand. Pictures, artwork, etc. Other documentation in which individuals describe events in which they were participants or observers. So here's an example. Newspaper articles written at the time. Even though, now this is a newspaper article about the Pearl Harbor attack from a Galveston, Texas newspaper. This reporter was almost certainly not there. If he was, he'd got himself all blowed up. But here he is the next day writing. It's still a primary source because it goes back to the time. Okay, so if I'm researching Pearl Harbor, I could use this as a primary source. Whereas your U.S. history textbook, when it talks about Pearl Harbor, is a secondary source. Photos, audio recording, moving pictures or video recordings documenting what happened. So years from now, when historians are watching the YouTube playlist for this class, because they want to understand what sort of an academic environment could have produced someone as magnificent as Sarah Samadi. Well, our class YouTube video, somebody who's not me, get the door since I'm the only one doing anything. Our YouTube videos of this class are primary source evidence for Sarah Samadi and for all of us who work here. Is it Samadi or Samadhi? I asked you one. I got, okay, good, because it's, oh, we talked about this like 2 years ago. Excuse us, everybody. We talked about this like 2 years ago. There's a Buddhist term, like a Japanese Buddhist term for enlightenment, or one who's enlightened is a Samadhi, but it's spelled a little different. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna go back to teaching now, okay? All right, cool. So here we have an example of a primary source. This is a propaganda poster put out by the United States government in the weeks leading up to World War I. And the goal of the poster is to get people to enlist in the military to go fight in the war. Look at how the potential enemy, and since it's World War I, so the bad guys, the enemies from the U.S. government perspective would be Germans. Right? How are the Germans portrayed in this picture?
Like beast animals?
Mm-hmm. Like beasts, like animals, savage, brute, monsters, subhuman. Why do you think a propagandist might want to portray a potential enemy as other than human? Caleb. Caleb's coming on up.
Well, I believe that's what propagandists do. You know, they exaggerate something in their eyes, how they want people to see their perspective, so they can further emphasize the enemy, I suppose.
So what's my goal if I'm the producer of this poster?
To make people believe that the Germans are horrid and vile beasts.
Okay, that's not my end goal. That's my means to my goal. My end goal is to make people do what? Bottom of the poster. Enlist. I want you in the service, all right? I want you in the service, and I want you in the service so that you can kill Germans. That's what I want. Now, it's, 1914. You're probably 16, 17, 18 years old, all right? You've probably never killed anyone before. Is it easy to kill somebody, especially for the first time? How was your first time, Miss Bella? Pretty good. It's not easy to kill people. What am I stepping on? My own stuff. It's not easy to kill because we have empathy. Right? There is something that happens to us when we see the face of another person. We see reflected in those eyes a being just like ourselves. It is very difficult to overcome that empathy and then to strike down and kill someone else. So this poster, you can take a seat, unless do you want to stay up and say more great things? Okay. So what this poster does, what this poster is it is psychological manipulation. So with this poster, if I'm the creator of this poster, I am reaching into Troy's subconscious and I am reshaping his subconscious such that he no longer sees the German as human. So that when he stands face to face with the German, he will be able to take out his machete, his bayonet, and you're not Jason, take out his bayonet and put the bayonet through the German's face instead of seeing in the eyes of that person a fellow human being. This is primary source evidence. What's that? Because they're German, because they're the enemy. Because they're the well, definitely somethingist. Definitely, my guess is the Germans and the person who made that poster are probably the same race, but it's definitely somethingist, culturist, or at any rate. Look. We're not talking about World War I in this class, but here's a piece of primary source evidence And this shows you why primary source evidence is valuable. We got all that. Everything we just talked about, we got from looking at one picture from the time. One picture said, it's the only words on this picture destroy the mad brute in list, but the picture says a lot more than that. Primary sources are doorways back to our past so that we can understand where we come from. Dun, dun, dun. Primary sources are actual records or items that have survived from the past, such as pictures. Really already said that. So here's another example. We go to the Library of Congress. They have a number of records of oral interviews conducted with formerly enslaved people after the liberation of the slaves, the end of slavery in the American Civil War. In fact, if you go on YouTube, there are actually videos from the 1920s and maybe the 1930s featuring very, very, very old people who, when they were very, very, very young people, were enslaved. So this isn't ancient history. There's videotape of people who were slaves in the United States of America. And they tell their stories. Why might someone studying the time benefit from something like this? And as opposed to just sticking with what the history textbook says. I'll come back to you in a second, Kira. Let me hear from over here. Kira, come talk to me.
I don't have anything to say.
Kira's got nothing to say? Okay. Troy, yeah.
Because you feel more like basically more emotion and more like, so like instead of someone just telling you like what happened, you can kind of like feel and kind of like get like an a imaginative like thought of like how it actually went instead of just hearing it from someone.
There's a huge difference between just reading about something and actually hearing about it from somebody who's experienced it. None of which is to say that secondary sources aren't also valuable. And they're valuable for the same reason. Because sometimes I need more than just the emotional response of somebody who was there in the moment. So if I'm studying the beginnings of World War I, this is a very valuable piece of evidence, but might it also benefit me to hear from somebody who doesn't think that Germans are subhuman brutes? Yeah. And that's where secondary sources come in with their value. The researcher who is further removed from the scenario can help us put things in context. I'll give you another example. If I said in my hand right here is Hitler's diary, is that a good source? Yeah. As far as its value in helping me understand what has happened in our world, it's an invaluable source. Is it the only voice I want to hear in trying to paint a picture of what happened in the 30s and 40s? No, I hope not. I hope not. I hope there's room in our hearts for voices other than Hitler's. It'd be kind of a bad world if that were, nope, Hitler said it, I believe it, that settles it. Yeah, that's not a very friendly world, is it? Written material is not the only source. Biological, forensic, archaeological, other physical and scientific evidence are also primary sources. So let's, and as we'll find out, we dive into Greece and Rome next week, that we don't always have written sources for these time periods. We'll look and we'll see the emergence of writing And it sort of has false starts and stops 2 or 3 times before Greece really becomes a long-term literate society. So that when there's nothing written, it doesn't mean we don't have sources, because this is a primary source too, about as primary as you can get. You know, if because historical investigation is I'm gonna pretend I don't see you, Dynasty, so you can keep. Is a lot like a criminal investigation. You're looking for the same things. You're looking for evidence. You're looking for a rational explanation of what happened. And if there's a murder, all right. So if there's a murder, then there's hardly better evidence you can ask for than the body. Well, the same is true in history. So this physical evidence is not to be discounted just because it's not written. They're also primary sources. An artifact is a specific kind of primary source. An artifact is a piece of human-made physical evidence. So in this case, then, both the coffin and the mummy are primary sources, but only the coffin is an artifact. And then after I wrote that, I thought, well, wait a minute. Mummies are artificially preserved, so I guess they kind of are man-made. So imagine there's just a regular dead body in the coffin and not a mummy. In that case, the coffin's an artifact, the dead body is not, but they're both primary sources. Just remember, primary sources are first-hand accounts, eyewitness testimony, original writings, physical and scientific evidence. They can be written or non-written. It's information presented in its original form. They're written when an event happened or near the event. They're not an interpretation or outsider's analysis. We also need interpretations and outsiders' analyses. I'm an outsider helping you to analyze the primary sources you're going to be exploring in this class. You are outsiders doing this too in this class, because you're going to work directly with primary sources. Your Cambridge exam papers are going to be secondary sources. Secondary source doesn't mean bad. A secondary source's value depends on how well you use and rely on the primary source. That's how one judges the value of a secondary source. Hit those points. Are written or non-written sources more valuable? What do you think? Troy says written. How come?
Because, like I said before, you kind of get more information in like a history backstory of what happened, and then like with like a single like object, you can only like see it, and that's really it. Really, can't really see the history and all that behind it.
Other thoughts on this? Whether written or non-written sources are more valuable? Here's a trick with written sources, though. So Troy, first, see by the black filing cabinet there, there's that big pad of paper. Bring that to me, please, and then come up here. Written source, that big paper pad, anchor charts or whatever it's called. Bring that to me. All right. Hand me this now. Come on up. Come here. Hold this. All right, show that to everybody.
Huh?
Show it to everybody. And show it to the camera. Troy is wearing a pink dress. This is come on up. Turn around. This is a written primary source. Why is it a primary source? Because I'm here right now. All right? I'm here where Troy is. Why is it written? Because I wrote it. What's the problem with this, Troy?
I'm not wearing it.
Yeah, it's not true. It's not true. That's the trick about written primary sources. Is written primary sources can, what did Gotti call me? Gotti called me a liar, right? Written primary sources can lie. Whereas these good folks, yeah, you're good. Just put that back, we got it. These guys, careful, these guys told their final lies long ago. Written sources can lie, or you don't have to be lying, you can be mistaken. If you're reading a scientific text on the sky from 800 years ago, it's going to tell you that the sun comes up in the morning and it travels around the earth and it goes down at night. Is that source correct? Nope. Is that source lying to you? Lying? No. 800 years ago? You look up in the sky, that's what you see happen. All right? People weren't idiots before Copernicus and Galileo. That's what it looks like happens, and they didn't know any better. So written sources, not only can they lie, sometimes they're just wrong. Yeah, like when you put wrong, Natalie, have you ever put wrong answers on a test ever? Yeah. Were you lying? Like, I'll show this. I want Mr. Roberts to think I think. No, of course. Well, I mean, you just be screwing yourself that way. Yeah, Caleb, are you trying to say something? With absolute certainty, you cannot. I mean, it's a question of probability whether someone's lying or just mistaken. But can you ever have absolute certainty about what's going on in the mind of anyone else? Like even the people most close to you in the world? You can't have absolute certainty. So, yeah, that's not possible. Caleb, if you don't hear him on the video or on the other side of the room, he's saying he wants to make the argument that non-written sources are more valuable because they're more credible. And in a sense, that's partially what I was saying, although I'm going to withhold the value judgment. So honestly, I don't think there's an answer to this. But I do think they're more credible in the sense that the physical evidence can't lie to you. But the physical evidence requires interpretation. So it doesn't remove the possibility that you are mistaken. In fact, the 800-year-old scientific description of the sky is simply reading the physical evidence of what it looks like is happening. So, Troy.
Another problem with the non-written sources is that someone could easily just hand you like a fake skull and say that this is from like 1000 BC or like something stupid like that. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure. So you have to verify all your sources. I could tell you that there's ground up unicorn farts in this water if I want to tell you that, but unless remember humanities, extraordinary claims demand what? Evidence. What kind of evidence? Extraordinary evidence. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. Remember the example I used in humanities was this. I said, all right, so if I tell you my middle name is Eric, you say, I don't believe you. All right. You say, prove it, give me evidence. So I pull out my driver's license. I don't know where it is. I haven't driven in months. Shoot. Oh, here it is. Yeah, pull up my driver's license. All right, well, it doesn't have it on there, but it has a middle initial anyway. What's my middle initial? All right, so you've got my word and driver's license that at least supports me. Is that enough evidence for my middle name being Eric? Yeah. I mean, do you believe me? No. No, why not? Okay, but think about the kind of claim I'm making. I'm claiming that my middle name is Eric. Is that an extraordinary claim? It's a pretty ordinary claim. All right. So hang on. Maybe my Social Security card's in here. Maybe I ran into the same problem last year with. Okay, yeah. All right. So scratch the driver's license. I claim my middle name's Eric, and then I show you my Social Security card. What's that say? Yeah, it says Eric on my social security card. Do you believe me now? Yeah. It was an ordinary claim. I showed you this is enough evidence. If I, that's not us. We do only have 5 minutes left though. If I claim that I'm 300 years old, this was the thing we did in humanities last year. If I claim that I'm 300 years old and I pull out my ID and it says, look, it says I'm born in, what was 300 years ago? I was born in 1779. Is that about 300? Would I be 341 if I were born in 1779? Yeah, yeah. Would you believe that? No, because I've made an extraordinary claim and I've just offered you piddly evidence. Let me fast forward to the end of this because we are in the last few minutes and I am taping. So another thing, and look, the reason there's no answer to the question is because we need them both. There are no written records from the first 240,000 years of human history. Writing is about 10,000 years old. People are 250,000 years old. Which means, look at these people up here. All these people. They had hopes and dreams. They had friends and families. They got angry. They fell in love. They had all these experiences, and they are all lost forever because it all happened. I'm not holding you after, by the way. That bell wasn't for us. We still have about 5 minutes. If written sources were the only things that were valuable, then we would know nothing about most of our history. But even though written sources can be mistaken and can be lies, at the same time, written sources let us go deeper into an experience than any other kind of source. If we had 1 page of writing from 100,000 years ago, it would revolutionize our understanding of ourselves and the world we live in. But we don't, because it didn't exist. Most of what has been written is lost forever. This is depressing. What's up? Okay. I'm in the middle of something, but if I were to write down the names of every document that survives from the ancient world, 1 line, name of the document, next line, name of another document, they'd all fit in this notebook. Almost everything is gone. So what we do have is incredibly precious, incredibly precious. Secondary sources, valuable for putting things in context. Let's say that is, again, this is just a simple review of content. You've been talking about this stuff since 6th grade, right? Primary and secondary sources, right? No one's going to respond to me at all, even almost? Yes. Yes, okay, wonderful. So a simple review is all we needed, right? Okay. Tomorrow we will look at how there are hidden primary sources buried unknowingly in the stories that we tell one another. That is for us tomorrow.